So having seen the boyhood home of President Ronald Reagan there, and having learned about the 77 people that Reagan rescued there at Lowell Park from the waters when he was a lifeguard, I'll tell you what, it makes me realize that when God chooses those that would be over us in leadership, that, it's his sovereign choice. And it's often the case that people remark that the people get the kind of leaders they deserve. Now, one of the things that Reagan promoted a lot there is that, we the people basically choose the course that government should go, that we decide, that's like a car, we decide how fast, we decide, what direction, we decide those sorts of things. And, we elect our leaders here, that it's the people that decide what the government is to do in our nation. That's one of the things that President Ronald Reagan taught, that all the other constitutions of the world, that they tell the people what their privileges are, but that our Constitution's different in that it is that we tell the government what it can do, and so what it can't do, basically. And when we look at that and we think about that, and we reflect on this fact that President Reagan, saved those 77 people, from the waters there. Let's think about it. Let's say, you were to save one person from drowning. That one person would be very grateful, very glad that they didn't drown. You'd possibly have a very special relationship with that person, because they may reciprocate, those feelings that you put your life on the line for them, that, they have a feeling of respect for you, and maybe even a feeling of love, that, you committed yourself to possibly dying on their behalf by saving them in the water. Now, you multiply that by 77 times. And then Reagan's mother there going into the jails for the salvation of the soul. I mean, and spending time with the inmates there, and 20 minutes each. I mean, and you think about how much of an influence that has on people, and not just an influence, but some of this comes down to a significance in life, and even possibly an eternal significance. That there's fruit out of this. And it's one thing to have nice sounding words, to try to say appealing things to people. It's another thing to have real sacrifice. And one of the things that we get into today, I find, is that, our nation's a lot different than what it had been in the past. And, it really is the case that in the past, you knew your neighbors. In the past, your neighbors cared about one another. And people loved one another more, I believe, in a lot of ways. They lived in very tight communities. Nowadays, it's the case that with the internet and with cellular phones and with the advance of large corporations and other technology, that it's easy to lose connection with the people around us. And as a result of that, people feel more reliant upon government to step in and to take care of them when their friends, family, neighbors simply aren't even people they know. and people don't love one another as they did before. And those opportunities, for example, to be a lifeguard like Reagan was, they no longer exist. You can still be a lifeguard in a pool, but Reagan, he was trained for 3 years to be a lifeguard, because that's how long it took back then to be trained for a lifeguard. And this was a lifeguard in the Rock River. You can see how fast that river's moving. I'm right beside the river. It had a very strong undercurrent. It could pull people in, and then, lifeguard had to fish them out there, and it's a dangerous, very dangerous job. And nowadays you don't have that. You just have a pool, and people swim in a pool, and if somebody's drowning, it's easy to pull them out if you know how to swim. So, there's a big difference there, and so really a lot of this, like when people don't skate on the ice anymore, you don't have people that fall through the ice, and when you don't have people that fall through the ice, you don't have people that come in and save them. When you don't have people that come in to save them, you don't have the sacrifice. And government, a lot of times, is established in such a way that it can eliminate risk, reduce risk, and for people, maybe put in signs that say no skating on the ice, thin ice. I'm not saying all those things are bad, but what I am saying here is that it eliminates the opportunity for the sacrifice. So then you can lose the understanding of the lesson that would be taught through people like Ronald Reagan. And that makes a big difference then, because then people don't learn those lessons unless, they go to museums and stuff, and unless they really connect with people that understand and teach those things. And I'll tell you what, in my life, the big sacrifice that I did is I went to college and graduate school for 20 years. That doesn't seem like anything close to, jumping into a pool, jumping into a river, saving 77 people from drowning. But, I'll tell you what, it is the case that a lot of people today, they don't know. It's been said by a priest I knew that they don't know their right hand from their left spiritually. That people today are lost often. They just don't know. They don't know. They don't understand a lot of times. And they don't believe often in the truth. Because they haven't been taught. They haven't gone to church. They don't know anything about the fact that Jesus Christ died on the cross, and that he did so for payment for sin, purchasing us basically, and so that we wouldn't have to go to hell basically. And people don't understand that because they haven't been taught. They haven't learned that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. To some people these days, these are completely new concepts. And if they are new concepts, I'm glad that you're learning about this stuff, because it's important. Don't feel ashamed at all. If you don't know your right hand from your left, don't be ashamed. You need to learn. You need to know. And I know that, physically, some people, they don't learn their right hand from their left until they're older, and that's just how it can be. And you get a situation where if you're not taught, you never learn. Now, one of the things that I'll tell you about this here is we're getting into a point in our history of this country where I'll just be quite frank here. I'm afraid for the future, and it's hard to say this, but I've seen houses where people have lived, and they've had big families, and they've had families like maybe families of 8 people, and all lived in a big house, and were able to do that maybe a generation or two ago, and but now, people are only feeling like they can have 2 children, and because they can't afford a third, and if they have a third, then they feel like the government won't support them, and they feel like they need that government money, and that the businesses don't pay them enough to have a third child, and that they can't find any kind of income anywhere that's reliable to support a third child, even if they wanted a third child. I mean, and so, like, and even being able to have a job, I mean, for example, that these things become very, very difficult. And but the time when Reagan lived, before that, especially, that where I live in Illinois, and Reagan's from this area, that it was the case that people could go anywhere and they can get a job. If they didn't do well in a factory, they could go to the factory next door, and if they didn't like their job, get a new one, and it was very, very easy to go from job to job. And these days, it's very hard. It's very hard for a lot of people. That there can be a lot of jobs out there, but a lot of times there's problems with them. It's the case that you get into a job somewhere, and you might think you got a full-time job, and it turns into a part-time job. And you might think that you got something permanent, and it doesn't last forever. And it's the case for a lot of people like that. Not just 1 or 2, but the bulk of people sometimes in some places that go into these places that don't pay well. I realize that there's a difference here between a quality sort of position that you can get, like, and not be a fast food job. Fast food jobs were often notorious back in the day for being places that you didn't want to work, and so I'm just giving that as an example. I know the industry's really changed a lot these days. I know there's a difference between that and something that you go to college for, and the job requires a degree, and maybe requires 5 or 10 years worth of experience. But I'll tell you what, even in those jobs where you get in and it requires some experience and it requires a degree, it can still be the case that you can be real easily replaced a lot of times, and because the companies there, they don't have as much of a need a lot of times for labor. I mean, just to make a long story short, what I mean by that is that, like, back in the day, like, if you had a company that was manufacturing things, you had to have tremendous amount of labor. I mean, you had to have thousands and thousands of employees. These days, those companies aren't even big enough most of the time to employ thousands and thousands of employees. And if they are, they're usually not in the United States as much. And if they are, they're usually in poorer places that pay less. They're not in more industrialized areas that so these areas, like where I live, your companies are a lot smaller. You get a situation where it used to have big companies that had a lot of manufacturing, but now it tends to be more of a custom manufacturing. And when it's like that, it can be small projects and stuff. or small orders, small batches maybe. Not tremendous, huge manufacturing. And so there you get a situation where, yeah, it does need people and stuff, but when the innovations come, which they can rapidly come, you don't need as many people, and the focus becomes more on innovating and having solutions and stuff to ways of producing things cheaper even, and producing things in smaller batches. So I don't mean to focus so much on the industry part of this, the industrial part of this, but and some of this stuff is kind of dated, what I'm telling you. So really the economy today is a lot different than the economy of 10 or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, I would imagine. And one of the things that I'll tell you here in looking at these things and talking about them is that we live in a time when people they're not believing like they used to. That's what I've kind of come to the conclusion of. Like I say, it used to be the case that there's more community, and now it seems like there's less community. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just me. But we get to the point where at some point we have to say, you know what? We need to love one another. I don't know how. I don't know what the process will be for that. But at some point, we need to love one another. And in so doing, we need to be part of a community here. And I'm just standing here, and it looks like there's an ambulance that's coming in. So I don't know what's going on here, but I might pay heed to that a little bit. But especially given the fact, what we see with Reagan there. So anyway, God bless, God be praised. Bye for now.